Hello, our favorite humans. Welcome to Bronx Tales. If you're new here, this is your host, Bronxy B, and I'm Logan. Thank you for being here. In the last 2.5 years, we've watched mainstream media and reporters tear Bryan Kohberger apart, from his looks to his demeanor, personality, and everything in between. And they have been absolutely relentless. But what some of you might not know is that back in 2018, Bryan Kohberger was working as a security guard. And he was working in a school and he had a partner. And while he was working, a lady started having an emergency. She was the hall monitor and she started having an emergency. And they didn't know if it was her heart. They didn't know if it was asthma. They didn't know what was going on. But she was having a very severe, clear emergency. And Bryan Kohberger jumped into action and ran and got the AED device and brought it back. Now, if he is such a horrible person, he could have just stood by and did nothing and watched this emergency unfold to a person possibly losing their life. But he didn't. He jumped into action and he got a device and he ran back to try and help this lady for whatever she was going through. To me, that shows that he does have care, concern, compassion, and empathy for human life. But I feel like that's a story that you'll never hear from mainstream media. So for those of you who don't know that story, I do want you to be aware of that. They have done an amazing job dragging Bryan Kohberger through the mud. But there are good points to him, whether you want to admit it or not. And that's one of them. He jumped into action when he needed to, and he helped. And he helped save a woman's life. I was thinking the other day, and this is regarding the unidentified DNA that they have, unknown male, A, C, D, all the unknown male DNAs that they have. And I was thinking that I bet you anything that they tested Bryan Kohberger's DNA against those unidentified male DNA samples that they retrieved from the scene. And instead of saying it didn't match Bryan Kohberger, I think that they did test Bryan Kohberger's DNA against those unidentified male DNA samples that they retrieved from the crime scene. And I think it didn't match Bryan Kohberger's DNA. But instead of saying that it didn't match Bryan Kohberger's DNA, they just said it's unidentified male DNA because they didn't test it against anybody else's. But I think they're saying that to make an illusion to the jury, to make them think that, oh, it could possibly be Bryan Kohberger's DNA because it's unidentified male DNA. But I bet anything they tested his DNA against those samples that they took. And I bet it came back as not a match. But they don't want to admit to that. And they don't want to say that. And they want to make people think, just like they do with all their other wording for everything, they want to make people think that it's still a possibility that it could be Bryan Kohberger's DNA. But I bet they tested it against his, and I bet it came back as not a match. But instead, they're going to continue to call it unidentified male DNA. Now, I'm sure most of you tune in to Birdie's channel, and I want to touch just briefly on this study thing that he's been talking about, where the NIJ was given millions of dollars in funding to run this study on criminal psychology in the Pullman area. And the fact that Birdie thinks that it's a possibility that this study is a real thing and not just a conspiracy. Either way, I want to let you guys know that Kaylee's new employer was called Extreme Networks, and she was working for them already. Extreme Networks is an IT company, and they provide equipment to businesses and have contracts for different businesses and things, and they provide the IT equipment for that and walk them through how to use it. But their biggest contract is their government contracts. So I just wanted to point out that there is another connection there with this case and the government. Just to go along on Birdie's theory on there possibly being a study and this crime could have been this study, Kaylee's employer, Extreme Networks, has several different contracts, and their biggest contract is a government contract. And they provide IT equipment to the government. So there is a connection there. As we all know, today the gag was lifted July 17th. Hitler has finally lifted the gag, which makes me really eager to see what interviews come out, which family members do interviews, and what's said in those interviews. I'm patiently awaiting those interviews. But in case you missed it, Hitler did touch on the appeals process. And I know it was said, and many people think that Bryan Kohberger doesn't have a chance at having any appeals, but he does. He absolutely does. And Hitler did talk about the appeals process today. I just want to point out that I really struggle listening to Judge Hitler because all you can hear is his saliva squishing around in his mouth the whole time, and it just is so disgusting to me. Now, this last thing I want to talk about is I grabbed a clip from Miss Huda's channel, and her channel will be tagged in the description box below. She recorded an interview with Ashley Banfield, and I want to take a look at it.
I don't know what the fuck you're saying. With danger to Bryan Kohberger and court resources stretched thin, what exactly was the plan during trial, right? Because every single day of a 4-month trial, there was going to be explosive testimony and evidence made public. What was the plan for his security then? How is it any different than right fucking now? I don't get that at all. Screw Bryan Kohberger's safety. The issue is not his safety with a dissemination order, being lifted. This part just doesn't make any sense. You are going to have a 4-month trial. That's going to be way more dangerous than lifting a non-dissemination order now for a couple of days before sentencing. Safety? How could it be any different than at trial? Okay, maybe I'm missing something, and Ann Taylor, please call me if I'm missing something. And here's where the defense motion today also gets interesting. Kohberger's lawyers accuse the prosecution of trying to look like the grown-ups in the room, claiming that the state now withdraws its request to keep the gag order in place, quote, out of respect for the victims and the judicial process. Kohberger's lawyers are calling BS on that. They point out that when the prosecution states that it promises not to speak to the press, that's vague. It's vague, they say. Vague at best. Does that include attorneys, support staff, all 150 law enforcement officers involved in the case? Kohberger's attorneys say that if you were in the courtroom on July 2nd, you would know that an entire row of courtroom gallery was filled with law enforcement. And Kohberger's team is asking the obvious question. If the order is lifted, what's stopping any of them from giving interviews the minute they leave the courtroom? To which I say, right, yeah, exactly. It's a public process. They're public officers. This is a...
Yeah, I don't want to...
We're the public, and we've been left out of it. After the sentencing, his attorneys argue that it is reasonable, it's narrowly tailored, and it doesn't actually prevent the media from covering the case. It just stops the parties from fueling the chaos. Bullshit! Yeah, the media has been prevented from covering the case because we don't even know who the witnesses are half the time. We don't even know what the investigators found in that house. We don't even know half the stuff that led to Bryan Kohberger, right? Or what they had on him. Or why they saw it necessary to sign a deal with him instead of going through with a death penalty case. Why? What was it that changed your mind? Right? Prosecutors, what the hell was it that made you cut a deal? Because for the rest of us, with the limited information we have, it looked like dead to rights. I mean, it looked like you had him slam dunk. What was it? I guess that's under the gag order. His lawyers say that keeping the gag order in place is the only way to protect the integrity of the process and the safety of everyone involved. Maybe you're partly right, and Taylor, maybe you're right. Maybe there is a possibility that before sentencing, Bryan Kohberger could throw a fucking wrench into all of this and say, ineffective assistance of counsel before I give up my right to appeal forever and ever. Before you lay that sentence on me, I got one more knife that I want to stick into the process and fuck with everybody. Maybe you're right. And so maybe keeping the gag order in place until sentencing will protect us all from him being able to do that. But the rest of it, the security, Bryan Kohberger, fuck him. I honestly do not care about the security of Bryan Kohberger. I really don't. And I probably speak for a lot of people when I say I hope he gets shanked in prison.
This is the most appalling, classless, and tasteless segment I have ever heard her do. Aside from the language, I cannot believe that she said she hopes he gets shanked. What an awful thing to say. She's reporting on a case that entails violence to humans, and here she is wishing violence upon another human. Two wrongs don't make a right, Ashley Banfield. Anyways, that's what we have for you today. Do something nice for yourself today. Be kind, but more importantly, be kind to your dog. Bye, guys.